Quibi, Vice, WeWork, FTX, Bed Bath & Beyond. Quibi, $1.75 billion, dead in 6 months. Vice, a $5.7 billion bad boy media empire, sold in a bankruptcy fire sale. WeWork, $47 billion, to Chapter 11. FTX, $32 billion, to zero. Bed Bath & Beyond, 50 years of towels and toasters, gone. How did brands this loud, this famous, go from everywhere to remember that in what felt like a single scroll? At that moment, it was hard to imagine Quibi failing. It launched with Hollywood directors, A-list actors, a Super Bowl ad, and the big promise of mobile-first TV for people who never looked up from their phones. However, it shut down before most people even figured out how to download it. Vice spent years screaming, "We're not corporate," built an anti-establishment identity, and then quietly ended up begging corporate lenders to keep the lights on. WeWork told investors it wasn't just renting desks, it was elevating the world's consciousness. This meant it could justify tech startup valuations for what was, underneath, a very old-school real estate play. FTX wrapped "Trust Me Bro" crypto in stadium naming rights, celebrity endorsements, and a founder who looked like he'd just rolled out of a dorm room beanbag. Bed Bath & Beyond didn't need hype. It had something stronger: decades of habit. The blue coupons in the kitchen drawer. The suburban store you honestly thought might outlive you. And so here's the central irony. These weren't dusty old dinosaurs refusing to adapt. These were the brands that marketed themselves as the future. Mobile-first streaming, anti-corporate media, consciousness-raising co-working, next-gen crypto finance, a retail comfort blanket that felt too boring to ever die. Investors, celebrities, and everyday people poured money, careers, and reputations into these names. Employees moved cities for them. Fans defended them online. Politicians toured their offices. Then, in the most online decade in history, those same brands evaporated in front of millions of screens, often in a few brutal news cycles. What's interesting, though, is that attention was supposed to be the ultimate currency of the 20s. If everybody knows your logo, how do you still go broke? How did Quibi go from the future of streaming to a content library pawned off to Roku for under $100 million? How did FTX go from buying an NBA arena to exposing an $8 billion hole overnight? This story gets crazy. Welcome to the insane history of 5 unkillable brands that died anyway. This video is not just a roast, it's a forensic journey through 5 ironic collapses, where hype, branding, and reality slammed into each other in public. By the end, the rise and fall of Quibi, Vice, WeWork, FTX, and Bed Bath & Beyond might change how you look at the brands you trust today, and which ones could vanish next. So here's the roadmap for this corporate graveyard tour. This isn't just a random list of failed companies. It's 5 full funerals, each from a different era of the 2020s, stitched into one rising drama. Think of it like a season of television where every episode gets a little more unhinged, a little more expensive, and a lot more ironic. First stop, Quibi, the $1.75 billion Quick Bites streaming app that launched in 2020, locked to phones only, right when everyone was stuck at home on their couches. Their dream was to reinvent Hollywood for the subway commute, in a year when no one was commuting. How did Quibi go from red carpet premieres and Super Bowl ads to selling its entire library to Roku for under $100 million? At that moment, it was hard to imagine a faster, more awkward collapse. From there, the story shifts to Vice, the anti-corporate punk brand that swore it would destroy old media, then quietly became old media. This is the digital media gold rush era. viral documentaries, brand deals, a $5.7 billion valuation, and offices that looked more like nightclubs than newsrooms. However, every day, the numbers stopped adding up. What's interesting, though, is how the company that mocked sellouts ended up begging traditional TV networks and private equity guys for survival. Then, the camera moves into the unicorn startup bubble with WeWork. The community company that rented desks called it a revolution and somehow hit a $47 billion valuation. The founders promised to elevate the world's consciousness with kombucha taps and glass walls. This meant investors were buying a vibe more than a business. When the infamous IPO filing dropped, the mask slipped. And this changed everything for how the world looked at startup hype. After that, the stakes go nuclear with FTX. The crypto exchange that bought a Super Bowl ad, an NBA arena, and celebrity trust then lost over $8 billion in what felt like a long weekend. This is the crypto mania and crash era, where "trust me bro" branding replaced boring audits. How did a company worth $32 billion become a courtroom meme almost overnight? This story gets crazy. Finally, the pace slows down for a different kind of death: Bed Bath & Beyond. The suburban coupon kingdom that survived for 50 years, only to be finished off by the slow-motion retail apocalypse. Towels, toasters, and those endless blue coupons couldn't beat Amazon's one-click reality. Eventually, the brand name was sold for about $21.5 million, turning a family weekend staple into a liquidation punchline. By the end, these 5 stories connect: streaming wars and pandemic shock, the digital media gold rush, the unicorn bubble, cryptomania, the retail collapse. Welcome to the insane history of the 2020's most ironic brands, and why their ghosts are probably haunting the apps on your phone right now. Because here's the thing: in the late 2010s and early 2020s, brands like these didn't just feel successful, they felt inevitable. The whole economy was wired to make anything with a slick deck and a big promise look too big to vanish. Zero-interest money was flooding everything. Venture funds were raising record-sized pools. SoftBank was throwing billions at startups that barely had customers. And so a co-working office could be valued at $47 billion, a crypto exchange could be worth $32 billion, and a mobile streaming app could raise $1.75 billion before most people even knew its name. At that moment, it was hard to imagine the party ending. Streaming wars were burning cash like rocket fuel. Netflix, Disney+, HBO Max, Apple TV+, Peacock. Every logo wanted a tile on your home screen. E-commerce was crushing old retail every day, turning big-box parking lots into empty asphalt, while Amazon vans became part of the neighborhood scenery. Meanwhile, crypto euphoria turned finance into fandom. Tokens launched overnight. Number go up became an investment thesis. FTX slapped its name on an NBA arena and bought a Super Bowl ad, and this meant a Bahamas-based exchange suddenly felt as trustworthy as a century-old bank. What's interesting, though, is how all of this collided with a new kind of branding. Companies stopped saying, "Here's a product." Instead, their dream was, "Here's who you are if you use this." WeWork wasn't just renting desks, it was elevating the world's consciousness. Vice wasn't just a media company, it was an anti-corporate movement that somehow also took corporate money. Crypto platforms weren't just trading venues, they were financial freedom in app form. So when these brands collapsed, it didn't feel like a bad quarter. It felt like betrayal. The revolution had a burn rate. The movement had a cap table. The community came with liquidation preferences. And social media turned every rise and fall into a live show. Twitter hype cycles meant each funding round was a mini victory parade. TikTok memes could make a brand cool in a weekend, then uncool by Monday. YouTube explainers unpacked every leaked document and courtroom transcript. One viral thread could wipe out years of carefully crafted myth in a single afternoon. However, this story gets crazy when the core irony shows up. The louder a brand yelled about being the future, the more fragile it usually was. Behind the neon slogans and inspirational decks, many of them were propped up by cheap money, unsustainable growth targets, or pure narrative spin. How did a company that promised to change culture end up begging lenders for one more extension? How did too disruptive to fail turn into sold for parts? Welcome to the insane history of brands built on confidence, timing, and a very specific kind of optimism. And in a decade where everyone was stuck at home binge-watching on giant TVs, one of the first to go was a $1.75 billion streaming app built only for your phone. How did that go from future of entertainment to shutdown in 6 months? Quibi. 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 In 2020, investors burned almost $2 billion on a streaming app most people never even opened. How did Quibi go from future of entertainment to punchline in record time? On paper, the founders looked unstoppable. Jeffrey Katzenberg, Hollywood royalty, who helped build Disney's 90s animation empire and DreamWorks. Meg Whitman, the hard-nosed executive who scaled eBay and ran Hewlett-Packard. Their dream was simple but bold: raise around $1.75 billion and reinvent how you watch video on your phone. The pitch had a catchy name: Quick Bites, episodes under 10 minutes, premium shows, movie-level budgets, all designed for those in-between moments when you were commuting, waiting in line, or grabbing lunch. The app itself was called Quibi, literally a mashup of quick bites. Like Netflix had a younger, mobile-only cousin that only served snacks instead of full meals. And this changed everything about how they sold it. Quibi wasn't just another app. It was marketed as a revolution in attention. Why waste time on random clips when you could have Hollywood-produced thrillers, comedies, and reality shows, all perfectly portioned for your day? At that moment, it was hard to imagine this thing failing. The names were huge. The money was huge. The ambition was huge. So the hype machine went into overdrive. Super Bowl ads before the product even launched. A-list talent everywhere. Chrissy Teigen judging cases. Liam Hemsworth running for his life. Directors like Guillermo del Toro and Steven Spielberg attached to projects. Red carpet-style premieres for shows that were only 6 to 8 minutes long. Headlines called it the next big streaming revolution, the Netflix killer for your phone. How could it not work, right? However, timing had other plans. Quibi finally launched in April 2020, the exact moment the world stopped commuting. Instead of watching on the subway, people were stuck at home on their couches with giant TVs, endless time, and full seasons to binge. Quibi had been engineered for elevators and bus rides. The elevators were empty. The buses were parked. What's interesting, though, is how confident the brand stayed, even in that chaos. No screenshots allowed. No sharing clips. No memes. No TV casting at launch. Quibi lived in its own walled garden, like it was too premium to be seen anywhere else. This meant if you wanted to show a friend a funny moment, you basically had to reenact it. The insane history of Quibi is not just about bad timing, it's about arrogance. The founders bet that big names, big checks, and a big idea were enough to force a new habit into existence. But attention doesn't work like that, and every day the numbers made that clearer. And this story gets crazy when Quibi's fall is compared to another too cool to fail media brand that thought it had the next generation locked in. Quibi was built for airport lines, subway commutes, and coffee breaks. Instead, it launched into a world where nobody was going anywhere, and everyone was glued to giant TVs. At that moment, it was hard to imagine a worse setup for a phone-only, on-the-go revolution. Quibi. How did Quibi go from the future of entertainment to a $1.75 billion punchline that shut down in 6 months? Their dream was simple on paper: Hollywood-quality shows, chopped into 10-minute, quick bites you would watch while running around living your busy, glamorous life. However, 2020 turned that fantasy into a joke. People were stuck at home, binging multi-hour Netflix series, deep-dive YouTube essays, and 8-hour Twitch streams. This meant the real winners were long-form platforms that could keep attention, not a tiny app begging for 10 minutes. And then came the paywall. From day one, Quibi expected you to pay a monthly subscription for content you could only watch on your phone, while Netflix, Disney+, and YouTube already owned your living room, your laptop, and your lunch break. There were free trials, but they were short, confusing, and landed in a moment when every other service was throwing open the doors. What's interesting, though, is how confident the founders were that star power alone would make people add yet another subscription. For bite-sized episodes they weren't even sure they wanted. But even if someone did give Quibi a chance, they hit another wall instantly. Silence. No screenshots that mattered. No native clipping. No easy way to rip a moment and blast it on Twitter or TikTok. In a world where a single meme can turn a random Netflix scene into a global obsession overnight, Quibi basically said, "Please enjoy this in private." And this changed everything. Because without those viral loops, there was no free marketing, no fandoms, no culture forming around the shows. The content itself didn't help. Quibi spent huge money making glossy, overproduced series that looked like traditional TV trying to cosplay as YouTube. Big celebrities, dramatic lighting, quick twists, but no authenticity, no messy creator energy, no comment section turning into a community. It sat in a weird, uncanny valley, too polished to feel personal, too short to feel like real TV. The numbers told the story brutally. Millions downloaded the app thanks to hype and free promos, but many never even opened it after day one. Engagement sagged, daily active users flatlined, and eventually, most people didn't install it at all. This story gets crazy when those weak stats are compared to another brand that thought it had young audiences locked in, Vice, and ended up discovering that edge and attitude are just as fragile as a failed streaming app. Quibi. In 2020, investors poured almost $1.75 billion into a streaming app you probably never even opened. How did Quibi go from the future of entertainment to a corporate obituary in just 6 months? The launch looked unstoppable. April 2020, right in the middle of global lockdowns, Quibi finally arrived after a year of hype. The founders, Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman, lined up Hollywood stars, glossy originals, and a Super Bowl ad. Their dream was simple on paper. Quick bites of premium content, under 10 minutes, designed only for phones. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this shiny new brand would be gone before Halloween. However, reality hit almost immediately. Download numbers spiked at launch thanks to free trials and non-stop press, but inside the company, reports started leaking that paid subscribers were way below targets. People tried it, then forgot it. Every day, executives held tense meetings, and this meant the pressure on Katzenberg and Whitman kept rising. Instead of admitting the core idea might be flawed, leadership blamed the pandemic. The pitch had been, watch on the go, in line, on the train. But nobody was commuting. Ironically, Audiences were stuck at home binging long-form Netflix shows on giant TVs, while Quibi refused to let users even cast to a television at first. What's interesting, though, is that this story gets crazy when the pivots start. They scrambled. Quibi rushed out an ad-supported tier to lower the price barrier. They patched in TV casting after insisting for months that portrait and landscape phone viewing was the revolution. They loosened rules so creators could share clips on social media after originally locking everything inside the app. And so, feature by feature, Quibi slowly abandoned the very restrictions that were supposed to make it unique. It wasn't enough. By October 2020, barely 6 months after launch, Katzenberg and Whitman published an open letter with a rare admission. Quibi just wasn't catching on. Rather than drag out a slow, embarrassing decline, they chose to shut it down and return remaining capital to investors. For a project that had raised almost $2 billion, the speed of that decision was almost unheard of. Then came the final indignity. Quibi's entire content library, all those celebrity shows and premium quick bites, was reportedly sold to Roku for under $100 million. Years of hype, hundreds of millions in production costs, turned into a bargain bin streaming channel. How did a brand with that much money, talent, and press vanish in half a year? Welcome to the insane history of 2020's revolutionary companies, where Quibi's supercharged failure quietly asks a darker question. If even this couldn't survive, what does that say about the next big thing everyone is being told to trust? Quibi tried to manufacture a revolution from the top down. Vice did something very different. Vice made you feel like the revolution was already happening, and you were late. Vice, Vice, Vice. How did a scrappy punk magazine that screamed "Facho's corporate media" go from stapled zines to filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy at a $350 million fire sale price? Welcome to the insane history of the brand that built an empire by hating empires. Back in the 90s, Vice started as a tiny, edgy magazine in Montreal, obsessed with the stuff respectable outlets pretended didn't exist. Drugs, underground music, fringe politics, bizarre subcultures. Their dream was to be the opposite of glossy newsstands and polite TV anchors. The tone was raw, juvenile, and proudly offensive. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this little chaos project would one day sit in boardrooms with Disney executives. But the internet loved chaos. As video got cheaper and YouTube exploded, Vice leaned in. The brand morphed from print into viral documentaries and gritty YouTube channels, sending barely slept crews into war zones, drug dens, and places legacy networks wouldn't touch without 10 lawyers. North Korea tours, Liberia warlords, we did every drug in the world style pieces. Compared to polished TV news, Vice felt dangerous and too real. This meant millions of young viewers suddenly trusted Vice more than the networks their parents watched. And this changed everything. Because once you own youth attention, the corporations you hate start calling. Vice didn't just stay an online rebel. It launched a full cable channel with A&E, built a giant branded content agency making ads for the same brands it mocked, and cut deep partnerships with blue-chip advertisers. How do you stay anti-corporate while cashing corporate checks every day? By 2017, the answer seemed to be very profitably. Investors valued Vice around $5.7 billion. Disney, Fox, private equity funds, the straightest of straight-laced money, all piled in, betting Vice would be the future of youth media. The punk zine was now a heavily financialized media empire, with studios, newsrooms, and global offices. However, on camera, the vibe barely changed. The documentaries still talked like they were against the system. even as that system was literally paying the bills. What's interesting, though, is how quiet that pivot felt from the outside. Viewers saw the same gritty field pieces. Behind the scenes, there were debt loads, missed revenue targets, and pressure to scale like a tech startup. Eventually, the math stopped working. In 2023, Vice filed for bankruptcy and sold for about $350 million, less than a tenth of its peak. So the brand that built its identity on hating corporate media died as corporate media. If that sounds ironic, the next story takes it even further. What happens when a community company convinces the world it's not a landlord at all? Because Vice wasn't just a weird one-off. It was the poster child for an entire digital media gold rush that thought the rules of gravity had been permanently turned off. Welcome to the 2010s, where BuzzFeed, Vox, Vice, and a dozen other logos you saw every day all chased the same dream: grow at any cost, dominate the youth audience, and figure out profits later. Their dream was simple. If you owned the attention of every 18 to 34-year-old on Earth, how could you possibly lose? At that moment, it was hard to imagine they were building something fragile. Traffic was exploding, venture capital money was pouring in, and Facebook shares looked like a printing press for page views. The playbook was clear: optimize headlines, engineer virality, chase whatever the algorithm loved this week, then sell that scale to advertisers who were terrified of missing the next generation. However, there was a catch. Almost all of that growth sat on top of one model: ads. These companies depended on Google search, Facebook feeds, and later YouTube recommendations to shove content in front of you. This meant the real landlord wasn't Vice or BuzzFeed. It was the platforms, and the rent was brutal. So they layered on branded content deals, sponsorships, and slick native ads disguised as journalism. The pitch sounded unstoppable. Give us your brand dollars today, the profits will come tomorrow. Eyeballs now, margins later. How did a media strategy that looked so modern go from future of news to mass layoffs and fire sales? This story gets crazy when Vice enters expansion mode. Flush with cash and hype, it opened international bureaus, launched a TV channel, produced glossy documentaries, and tried to be a record label, ad agency, studio, and news network all at once. The empire assumed ad money and investor patience would never run out. Every day, the overhead climbed higher. The revenue didn't quite keep up. Then the platforms moved the goalposts. Facebook changed its newsfeed algorithm, and suddenly, pivot to video traffic vanished. YouTube demonetization waves hit anything remotely edgy. Advertisers, burned by scandals on social platforms, pulled back from anything that looked even slightly controversial. And Vice's whole brand? Controversial by design. What's interesting, though, is that the same edge that made Vice cool also made it brand unsafe. War zones, drugs, extremists, underground scenes. Great for clout, terrible for risk-averse marketers. When the ad tide went out, the punk empire started to look less like a revolution and more like a very normal, very over-leveraged media company staring at its bills. And Vice wasn't alone. Across the 2020s, other can't-fail darlings discovered what happens when the story is worth more than the business. Because if a media brand could burn billions chasing attention, what happens when a startup convinces investors it's not even in the industry everyone thinks it is? How did a brand that literally called itself a revolution go from punk media unicorn to rummage sale item on a bankruptcy spreadsheet? Vice, Vice, Vice. For years, that name meant cool, dangerous, and somehow smarter than everyone else. But behind the tattoos and neon, the numbers started screaming. By the late 2010s, Vice kept missing its own hype. Revenue targets slipped. Ad dollars that were supposed to flood in trickled. And so the company did what every "we're not like other media startup" swore it would never do: layoffs, restructuring, and frantic cost-cutting. Entire verticals were merged or shut down. Vice News was trimmed, and the founders quietly shopped pieces of the empire to anyone who would take the call. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this was the same company that, in 2017, investors valued at around $5.7 billion. Their dream was to build the MTV, CNN, and HBO of the internet generation all at once. However, the growth story stalled. The TV deals didn't scale like a tech platform, the digital ad market softened, and those glossy partnerships with Disney and Fox started looking less like rocket fuel and more like golden handcuffs. Meanwhile, something more dangerous than missed revenue was happening: credibility erosion. Vice had built its whole identity on being the anti-corporate truth-teller, but accusations of toxic culture, harassment, and mismanagement started leaking out. Former staffers talked about burnout and chaos. Stories hit mainstream outlets. What's interesting, though, is how fast the perception flipped. The rebel brand that mocked sellouts now looked like it had sold out its own people. Advertisers noticed. Viewers noticed. Every day, the gap between the Vice aesthetic and the Vice balance sheet got wider. The edgy documentaries were still there, but the magic trick was gone. It didn't feel like a movement anymore. It felt like a very normal media company trying very hard to pretend nothing was wrong. Then, this story gets crazy. In 2023, after years of layoffs, restructurings, and failed attempts to sell the company outright, Vice finally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. A group of lenders agreed to buy the entire business for about $350 million. That's not nothing, but compared to a $5.7 billion peak valuation, it's basically a clearance rack sticker. Symbolically, it was brutal. The anti-corporate rebel brand ended up begging private equity firms for rent money. The company that once filmed itself sneaking into war zones was now negotiating with creditors in conference rooms. Welcome to the insane history of a revolution that became exactly the thing it used to ridicule. And this changed everything for how people saw disruptors. If Vice shows what happens when a revolution turns into just another media company, the next brand shows what happens when a real estate company pretends it's a spiritual movement and convinces the world to believe it. If Vice was the rebel that accidentally became the establishment, WeWork was the landlord that pretended to be a religion. WeWork, WeWork, WeWork. How did a company that rented office space go from boring leases to elevating the world's consciousness? And then to bankruptcy court. On paper, the model sounded simple, almost dull. WeWork would sign long-term leases on big office floors, chop them into smaller units, and sublease them as flexible co-working desks. You paid monthly, got a hot desk or a tiny glass box, plus Wi-Fi, free coffee, and the promise that sitting next to other creators would somehow change your life. It was Regus with better lighting. However, the branding tried very hard to convince everyone this wasn't real estate at all. This wasn't about subletting beige cubicles. This was a movement. In its 2019 IPO paperwork, the company literally wrote that its mission was to elevate the world's consciousness, not maximize occupancy, not reduce office friction, elevate the world's consciousness. At that moment, it was hard to imagine investors were still looking at a floor plan, not a scripture. Welcome to the insane history of a landlord that sold enlightenment. The offices were staged like lifestyle ads: millennial-friendly interiors, exposed brick, neon slogans, succulents on every table. There was kombucha on tap, artisanal coffee, phone booths with mood lighting, and community managers who sounded more like camp counselors than receptionists. Renting a desk came wrapped in language about community, belonging, and finding your tribe, until booking a conference room felt suspiciously like joining a very stylish cult. What's interesting, though, is how the story gets crazy once the numbers show up. Private investors didn't just like the vibe. They treated WeWork like a world-changing tech platform. By 2019, the company hit a private valuation of around $47 billion. This meant a glorified office subletter was worth more than many actual software giants. The pitch was that this was space as a service, powered by data, algorithms, and culture. But the costs? Those were painfully offline and very real. Every day, WeWork was locking itself into long, expensive leases that lasted 10 or 15 years, then turning around and selling one-month memberships to freelancers, tiny startups, and anyone who liked free cold brew. The founders talked about consciousness, but the balance sheet showed billions in losses. The dream was infinite growth, more buildings, more members, more community, so that the next wave of signups could help pay for the last wave of rent. And so, behind the neon signs and spiritual buzzwords, there was a basic tension no kombucha tap could hide. What happens when the vibe stops growing, but the leases don't? That question would eventually turn WeWork from a $47 billion miracle into a cautionary tale, and set the stage for the next brand that promised the future, only to run out of runway almost instantly. And that tension finally snapped in 2019, the moment WeWork tried to cash in on its own myth. The kombucha fountains, the neon mantras, the community company branding could only get it so far. To go public, it had to do the one thing the hype machine was never built for: show the receipts. Welcome to the S1. In August 2019, WeWork's parent company, the We Company, filed the massive document every company has to submit before listing on the stock market. Overnight, the secretive unicorn that sold vibes and vision had to reveal detailed financials, risk factors, and the fine print of how the business actually worked. And this changed everything. Because once people opened that S1, this story gets crazy. The filing showed that in 2018 alone, WeWork lost about $1.9 billion on $1.8 billion in revenue. That meant the company was literally losing more than $1 for every dollar it brought in. Every day, the more space it monetized, the more money it burned. At that moment, it was hard to imagine how this could ever be a stable landlord, let alone a $47 billion tech company. But the numbers were only the start. Buried in the document were related party deals that made investors do a double take. Adam Neumann personally owned buildings that WeWork then leased, meaning the company was paying rent to its own CEO. He had trademarked the word "we" and licensed it back to the company for millions. Their dream was to elevate the world's consciousness, but the paperwork looked a lot more like elevating one founder's bank account. What's interesting, though, is how the language of the S1 clashed with what it was supposed to be. This is meant to be a sober, almost boring financial document. Instead, WeWork filled it with spiritual slogans about community, mission, and global impact. It read like a wellness retreat brochure that accidentally stapled a few income statements to the back. Investors weren't buying it. Public market analysts, journalists, and governance experts tore the filing apart. Was this really a tech company, or just a very risky office subleasing business with a Silicon Valley costume? How did WeWork go from a cool co-working brand to a case study in what happens when marketing outruns math? Suddenly, That $47 billion private valuation looked less like vision and more like delusion. The unraveling was brutal and fast. The IPO was postponed, then effectively canceled. The valuation was slashed by tens of billions. Neumann was pushed out as CEO under a cloud of controversy, and so the company that once bragged about infinite expansion needed emergency funding from SoftBank just to keep the lights on and pay the last wave of rent. The irony is brutal. The moment WeWork had to stop selling vibes and start selling numbers, the entire community company narrative collapsed almost overnight. The S1 didn't just break the spell for WeWork. It warned investors that the 2020s would be ruthless to any brand that tried to hide bad unit economics behind good branding, and the next collapse would arrive even faster. And so, after that failed IPO, WeWork entered its most uncomfortable era: reality. The $47 billion community company suddenly had to act like what it actually was: a risky landlord with a smoothie budget. SoftBank rushed in as the emergency adult in the room. It poured in billions, took control, and pushed out Adam Neumann. Their dream was to turn this wild, consciousness-elevating unicorn into a boring, predictable office space business. Cost-cutting, layoffs, selling side projects, renegotiating leases. Every day became about survival instead of vision. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this was the same brand that once promised to elevate the world's consciousness through hot desks and kombucha. The guys in charge tried to rebrand the chaos as discipline. Less talk about spiritual revolutions, more talk about occupancy rates and churn. However, the numbers never really stopped bleeding. Then 2020 hit. A company built on cramming strangers into shared offices ran straight into a global pandemic. Remote work exploded, offices emptied out, and giant companies suddenly realized they did not want long-term leases or extra space at all. How did WeWork go from selling the future of work to being perfectly positioned for a world that didn't want offices? This story gets crazy when the timing is lined up. Just as WeWork needed stability, predictability, and full buildings to prove its new, disciplined era, the world's biggest experiment in working from home began. This meant members canceled, enterprise deals stalled, and landlords still wanted their rent. The whole "we take long leases and slice them into flexible memberships" model looked less like innovation and more like a leveraged bet on a world that no longer existed. Eventually, the post-IPO hangover turned into a full-on decline. Losses piled up quarter after quarter. The valuation shrank from that famous $47 billion peak to just a fraction of that in public markets. What's interesting, though, is how the branding stayed optimistic even as the filings got darker. Buried in the reports was a brutal phrase: substantial doubt about WeWork's ability to continue as a going concern. Investors knew what that meant. The startup that once sold itself as a lifestyle, a movement, almost a religion, was now warning that it might not survive the next few years. Every upbeat press release about right-sizing the portfolio was paired with another round of closures, exits, and emergency financing. In 2023, the inevitable finally happened. WeWork filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the US, officially completing the journey from $47 billion unicorn to cautionary tale. Welcome to the insane history of branding over substance, a company that tried to spiritualize office space and ended up as a case study in what happens when the vibes run out before the cash. But if WeWork showed the danger of turning desks into a religion, the next brand pushed the irony even further. What happens when someone tries to spiritualize money itself, convinces the world to trust the mission, and then vaporizes $8 billion in a single week? And that brings in Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy in the shorts and t-shirt, messy hair, and "who, me" expression, who somehow convinced Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and half of Hollywood that he was the responsible adult in crypto. FTX wasn't just another exchange, it was marketed as the safe, regulated grown-up option in a market full of memes, moon boys, and mystery tokens. FTX? 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 You heard the name everywhere. How did FTX go from the respectable face of crypto to one of the biggest financial disasters of the decade? From day one, their dream was to make crypto feel boring in the best possible way. Not casino-style gambling, but serious finance. The pitch was simple. Send your dollars here, trade your coins here, let FTX handle the scary stuff. This meant banks, hedge funds, and regular people who were terrified of shady offshore exchanges suddenly had a place that looked normal. However, the normal look came with anything but a normal marketing plan. FTX went on a full-blown branding blitz. Super Bowl ads? Of course. They bought a spot with Larry David literally playing the skeptic who says every big invention is dumb, only to end on, "Don't miss out on crypto." Tom Brady and Giselle? They became official FTX ambassadors, grinning in commercials about getting in on the future. And this changed everything. Because once you have Tom Brady, Larry David, and a Super Bowl ad, you're not just a crypto exchange anymore. You're culture. You're mainstream. FTX slapped its name on the Miami Heat arena, turning it into FTX Arena. Every day, sports commentators said the brand out loud on national TV. At that moment, it was hard to imagine that behind the scenes, anything could be seriously wrong. What's interesting, though, is how carefully the brand promise was crafted. FTX wasn't selling wild speculation, it was selling safety. The message was, let the degens play on sketchy platforms. This is where institutions come. Regulated feel, clean design, friendly explainer videos about risk management and compliance. It was the anti-scam, the antidote to everything people feared about crypto. By early 2022, the story gets crazy. FTX is valued at around $32 billion, treated as one of the crown jewels of the crypto boom. Politicians take meetings. Finance magazines run glowing profiles. Commentators call Sam the J.P. Morgan of crypto. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this empire could just vanish. But that's the irony. The company that sold itself as the safe harbor turned out to be the storm. The Trust Me Bro exchange was allegedly moving customer money around like a private piggy bank. And when the tide went out, $8 billion in user funds were suddenly gone. If FTX was the moment people realized the respectable crypto brand could be the riskiest bet of all, the next brand shows a different twist. What happens when the collapse isn't sudden at all, but a slow, decade-long fade of a store you grew up with? Behind the glossy ads and stadium logos, FTX was basically two main pieces. On the surface, there was FTX, the crypto exchange where you, the user, bought and sold coins. In the background, there was Alameda Research, a trading firm that was supposed to be just another customer. Separate, arm's length, totally normal. That was the story. However, behind the curtain, those lines allegedly blurred almost immediately. Alameda wasn't just some random client. It was the founder's original moneymaker. And so, according to regulators, FTX quietly gave Alameda a special backstage pass, the ability to borrow customer funds, avoid getting liquidated, and tap into a credit line that no regular user would ever see. On the website, everything looked safe. In the code, it was a different universe. Think of how this was supposed to work. You deposit dollars or crypto on FTX. The exchange holds it for you, matches your trades, and keeps customer assets ring-fenced like chips in a casino vault. Alameda, in theory, should trade with its own money and take its own risks. But what's interesting, though, is how the alleged reality flipped that script. Customer deposits on FTX reportedly flowed into Alameda's pockets. Alameda then used that pile for risky leveraged bets, venture investments in other startups, political donations, even luxury real estate. Every day, as long as prices were up and new users kept pouring in, the whole stayed hidden. On paper, FTX still looked rich. In the bank, there was less and less actual cash. How did the safest brand in crypto go from trusted custodian to a giant undisclosed hedge fund? The illusion of safety was powerful. FTX had a slick, friendly interface. It slapped its name on an NBA arena, bought a Super Bowl ad, and hired Tom Brady and Steph Curry to say they were in. There were constant interviews about regulation, compliance, and doing things the right way. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this was the insane history of a company allegedly using customer money like a revolving credit card. But the cracks were there if you looked. On-chain sleuths noticed weird flows between FTX and Alameda wallets. Skeptics questioned FTT, FTX's own token, which Alameda held in huge amounts, propping up its balance sheet with something that was basically FTX loyalty points. The financials were opaque, the structure confusing, but in the bull market hype, most people shrugged. The brand said, "Trust me, bro," and for a while, that was enough. Then this story gets crazy. In November 2022, a leaked Alameda balance sheet suggested the empire was built on sand. A rival CEO tweeted that his exchange would dump FTT, and suddenly, users rushed to pull funds. It was a classic bank run moment. Only this time, the bank had allegedly spent the deposits. And this changed everything. Within days, FTX went from $32 billion darling to bankruptcy. If FTX was a magic trick that fell apart in 1 week, the next brand shows what happens when the decline is slow, public, and almost nostalgic. The long fade of a big box giant that once felt like part of every weekend errand. If the FTX story felt like a magic trick falling apart, the week it collapsed was the moment someone turned the lights on. FTX, FTX, FTX. The name was everywhere. How did a brand that bought a Super Bowl ad, an NBA arena, and Tom Brady's reputation go from safest place in crypto to $8 billion gone in just days? It started quietly on November 2nd, 2022. CoinDesk published a report on Alameda Research's balance sheet, showing it was stuffed with FTT, a token essentially created by FTX itself. On paper, Alameda looked rich. In reality, a huge chunk of its assets were just FTX's own chips, backed by confidence more than cash. At that moment, it was hard to imagine this little spreadsheet leak would nuke a $32 billion empire. However, this story gets crazy fast. Just a few days later, Binance CEO Changpeng Zhao, CZ, tweeted that Binance would sell its remaining FTT, citing recent revelations. One tweet, billions on the line. The market heard it as, even the biggest rival is out. FTT's price started wobbling, traders panicked, and suddenly everyone holding funds on FTX had the same thought. Get out now, ask questions later. And so the digital bank run began. Customers rushed to withdraw, refreshing the app every second. At first, withdrawals went through. Then they slowed. Then, for some users, they just stopped. FTX support blamed node congestion and liquidity management, but the vibe had flipped. This meant people were no longer asking if FTX was safe. They were asking who would get stuck holding an empty bag. Within hours, Sam Bankman-Fried admitted there was a liquidity crunch. Behind that polite phrase was an $8+ billion hole between what users thought they had and what FTX actually held. A company valued at $32 billion earlier that year was suddenly scrambling to find a savior. How did a platform that bragged about risk management end up with less money than a mid-tier startup? For a brief moment, it looked like that savior had arrived. CZ announced a non-binding letter of intent for Binance to acquire FTX. Crypto Twitter went from funeral to "maybe it's fine" in a single screenshot. However, welcome to the insane history of last-minute rescues that never close. Once Binance got a look at FTX's books, it backed out almost immediately, citing the size of the hole and potential misconduct. The lifeline snapped. With no buyer, no confidence, and no cash, the end came fast. On November 11, 2022, FTX filed for bankruptcy. Sam Bankman-Fried stepped down as CEO, and the respectable face of crypto became the poster child for everything critics had warned about. Every day after that, new details leaked out. Luxury real estate, missing records, alleged backdoors. But the brand itself was already gone. If FTX was the loud, spectacular implosion of the "trust me bro" era, the next brand shows a very different kind of disappearance. A streaming startup that burned nearly $2 billion before most people even figured out how to pronounce its name. Quibi burned almost $2 billion trying to reinvent streaming. Bed Bath & Beyond did the opposite. It tried so hard not to reinvent anything that it started to feel immortal. Blue and white logo, blue and white coupons, blue and white storefront glowing next to a Target in every suburban shopping center. For decades, you could almost navigate American suburbia by those big block letters alone. Inside, it was sensory overload in the most boring way possible. Endless aisles of towels, towers of pillows, kitchen gadgets no one really needed, and that one wall of dorm room gear that basically screamed, "August move-in rush." This wasn't a brand people bragged about on Instagram. It was the place you went with your parents on a Saturday, pushing a slightly wobbly cart while someone argued about thread counts. And yet, at that moment, it was hard to imagine a world where that store didn't exist. Need a toaster at 8 p.m.? Bed Bath & Beyond. Need a shower curtain, a coffee maker, and a weird-shaped trash can for your first apartment? Bed Bath & Beyond. No hype, no manifesto, just quiet reliability. And then there were the coupons. Those iconic, oversized 20% off mailers that showed up so often they felt like part of the utility bill. They trained entire generations to never, ever pay full price. People stuffed them in kitchen drawers, glove compartments, purses, even car visors. They became a running joke. Expired? Didn't matter. Crumpled? Still good. Somewhere along the line, the coupon itself became more famous than the brand. What's interesting, though, is how deep it ran in people's lives. Over 50 years in operation. Thousands of stores across the U.S. wedding registries lived there. College move-ins started there. New jobs in new cities kicked off with a nervous walk through those aisles, scanning barcodes for sheets and silverware. This meant Bed Bath & Beyond wasn't just retail. It was a backdrop to life milestones, the boring stage on which big personal moments quietly played out. Compare that to the other brands of the 2020s. No Super Bowl crypto ads, no billion-dollar mobile-first streaming pitch, no promise to elevate the world's consciousness. Bed Bath & Beyond never tried to sound like a movement. It sounded like a place your aunt would recommend when you moved out. Just go there. They have everything. How did a store that safe, that ordinary, go from suburban security blanket to liquidation meme? because this story gets crazy in a very different way. In the same decade that flashy tech darlings and crypto empires imploded on live TV, this old-school coupon kingdom was quietly sliding toward the same fate, aisle by aisle. And the really ironic part? The thing that made it feel immortal for so long would end up making its fall even more brutal, because that immortal feeling ran straight into something that actually did feel immortal: Amazon. Every day, more of Bed Bath & Beyond's core shopper quietly defected to a search bar and a Prime logo. Towels, toasters, Keurigs, shower caddies, all suddenly lived on a screen, with 2-day shipping, reviews, and a bigger color selection than any suburban strip mall could dream of. How did a coupon empire go from weekend destination to tab you, forget to close? The Amazon effect hit them right in their supposed advantage. For years, the pitch was simple. Come in, touch the products, wander the aisles, grab a cart full of might-as-well extras. However, when you can compare 10 versions of the same blender in 30 seconds, that in-store mystery premium disappears. This meant Bed Bath & Beyond's giant, overstuffed floor plan started to feel less like a treasure hunt and more like a slower, more expensive version of your phone. Inside the company, the response was not exactly a masterclass. The shelves swung between chaos and minimalism. One year, it was brand name everything stacked to the ceiling. The next, it was random private label experiments no one recognized. At that moment, it was hard to imagine anyone at headquarters had actually walked the stores like a normal shopper. You'd see empty pegs, then one aisle over, 5 slightly different spatulas all doing the same job. And then there were the coupons. Those blue 20% off rectangles felt legendary. Their dream was to drive visits, create urgency, and make full-price margins look better on paper. But customers got trained like lab mice. Why buy anything today when another coupon will hit your mailbox, your email, and your glove compartment next week? What's interesting, though, is that the very marketing that made the brand famous also made full-price sales feel like a scam. Management tried to pivot with private label brands, hoping to copy Target's playbook. However, instead of curated design-forward lines, shoppers got confusing new names, lower perceived quality, and even less reason to choose Bed Bath & Beyond over Amazon. Eventually, those experiments just made the stores feel even more inconsistent. Behind the scenes, the numbers were getting uglier. Shrinking sales, rising competition, and pandemic shocks piled on debt. To cut costs, they closed locations, but that only made surviving stores feel emptier, lonelier, and less relevant. You'd walk in and think, did this place already start going out of business? Long before the official signs showed up. Then came the meme phase. In 2021 and 2022, retail traders on Reddit briefly turned Bed Bath & Beyond into a meme stock, launching the share price into the stratosphere. On paper, it looked like a comeback montage. In reality, nothing fundamental changed. Amazon didn't get slower. The debt didn't vanish. The aisles didn't magically restock themselves. And so the endgame arrived. By 2023, Bed Bath & Beyond finally filed for bankruptcy, shuttered its last stores, and sold its brand name and IP to Overstock for about $21.5 million. For a chain that defined half a century of suburban nesting, that number was shockingly small. But the story doesn't quite end there, because what Overstock did next would flip the script on that blue logo one last time. Because what Overstock did next would flip the script on that blue logo one last time. But before that twist, zoom out for a second. 5 different brands. 5 different industries. Yet they all crashed in almost the same way. Quibi overestimated demand, convinced that billions of dollars and Hollywood names guaranteed people wanted quick bites on a phone. Vice overextended on ad-driven cool, building a global media empire on vibes while the ad market quietly shifted under its feet. WeWork spiritualized rent, calling desks and glass walls a community instead of a risky real estate sublease game. FTX institutionalized "Trust me, bro," wrapping a basic exchange in celebrity ads and fake safety. And Bed Bath & Beyond underestimated e-commerce, holding on to aisles of towels and coupons while Amazon trained everyone to click instead of clip. On paper, they were all revolutions. A revolution in content, in media, in work, in finance, in shopping. Their dream was to make the old world look slow, dumb, and boring. However, under the glossy branding, the economics were fragile, outdated, or just straight up reckless. Quibi burned $1.75 billion on shows nobody could watch on a TV. Vice bragged about being the anti-corporate punk voice while quietly chasing the same brand dollars as the networks it mocked. WeWork hit a $47 billion valuation, selling long-term leases as month-to-month enlightenment. FTX called itself the safe, regulated face of crypto while hiding an $8 billion hole. Bed Bath & Beyond doubled down on 20% off coupons as warehouses full of unsold inventory piled up. How did these category killers go from changing everything to barely being worth their office furniture? What's interesting, though, is the timing. This is the 2010s and early 2020s, the era of cheap money. Interest rates were near zero, investors were desperate for growth, and FOMO did the rest. This meant it was suddenly easy to fund vibes over viability. As long as the pitch deck said disruption, someone wrote a check. At that moment, it was hard to imagine the money ever stopping. And so, valuations floated away from reality. You didn't need profits, you needed a story. You didn't need cash flow, you needed a category. The insane history of these brands is really the insane history of investors paying for branding first and business model, eventually. There's another trap running through all five: attention. Being loud, edgy, or omnipresent could temporarily cover up deep structural problems. Quibi bought Super Bowl ads. Vice filled every cool rooftop bar. WeWork plastered cities with its logo. FTX slapped its name on an NBA arena. Bed Bath & Beyond's coupons flooded mailboxes. If you saw them everywhere, they had to be solid. Right? But attention is sugar. It spikes fast, then crashes. When the pandemic hit, when interest rates jumped, when crypto winter arrived, the stories stopped working and the numbers had to speak. And this changed everything. So here's the uncomfortable question. How many current brands feel eerily similar? Massive promises, huge valuations, but almost no transparency about what actually works under the hood. In a decade where hype moves faster than ever, the next Quibi or FTX might already be in your feed right now. Because here's the twist. The 2020s didn't just kill random companies. The 2020s ran a giant global stress test. Pandemic, zero rates, then rising rates, plus a speculative crypto bubble. Welcome to the insane history of brands meeting reality in real time. Start with the pandemic. Overnight, the world stopped moving. Streets emptied. Commutes vanished. Offices went dark. Quibi's entire fantasy was on-the-go entertainment, 10-minute shows locked to your phone, no TV casting at launch. But suddenly, nobody was on the go. People were stuck on couches, binging 3-hour podcasts and entire seasons on Netflix. How did a $1.75 billion mobile-first revolution go from red-hot launch to shutdown in 6 months? The stress test said, if your product only works in one very specific lifestyle, you're in trouble when that lifestyle disappears. The same shock hit WeWork from a different angle. Their dream was to elevate the world's consciousness with shared offices and kombucha taps. Then, a virus made elevators and hot desks feel like biohazards. At that moment, it was hard to imagine big companies racing to cram employees into glass boxes again. However, what's interesting, though, is that flexible space should have been perfect for a post office world. The stress test revealed the real problem wasn't the idea of co-working. It was the debt, the long-term leases, and a business model that only worked if growth never slowed. Meanwhile, the money machine in the background flipped. For most of the 2010s, near-zero interest rates meant cash was basically free. This meant investors could fund grow now, profit later, forever. Vice. At a $5.7 billion valuation? Sure, WeWork at $47 billion? Why not? But as rates climbed in the 2020s and money got more expensive, the mood changed. Endless losses stopped feeling visionary and started feeling risky. Eventually, investors wanted boring things like cash flow and discipline. And this changed everything for brands built mostly on vibes. Crypto lived and died on that same wave. FTX is the purest example. In the easy money era, it bought a Super Bowl ad, slapped its name on an NBA arena, and signed Tom Brady. Every day, new coins, yield farms, and trust me bro narratives appeared. However, when rates rose and liquidity dried up, the tide went out. Scrutiny went up. A missing $8 billion hole appeared. The stress test exposed that underneath the stadium deals, FTX was less future of finance and more old-school misuse of customer funds. Then there's Bed Bath & Beyond, facing a slower but equally brutal exam. No sudden crash. Just a decade-long migration to Amazon, Target, and one-click reorders. The founders of its modern strategy cycled through private equity playbooks, meme stock spikes, and coupon gimmicks, but never a compelling digital experience. The stress test here wasn't a single shock. It was time. Every year the website lagged, the app underwhelmed, and the brand leaned on 20% off paper coupons. The gap widened. Eventually, bankruptcy wasn't a surprise event. It was the final page of a very predictable script. So these collapses weren't freak accidents. They were like pressure gauges on the decade. Quibi, Vice, WeWork, FTX, Bed Bath & Beyond. Each one showed what happens when narrative and momentum meet real-world constraints. The question now is, in the next stress test, which beloved brands discovered they were built on the same kind of sand? And here's the twist. All that sand was held together with hype. Quibi, Vice, WeWork, FTX, Bed Bath & Beyond. On paper, totally different. In practice, they were all running the same playbook. Celebrity endorsements, arena naming rights, viral ads, edgy content, mission-driven language so big it made selling office space sound like a spiritual movement. This is the hype playbook. First, borrow credibility. Quibi stacked a Hollywood roster: Steven Spielberg, Chrissy Teigen, Idris Elba. FTX rented out an NBA arena, put its name on the Miami Heat's home court, and wrapped itself in Tom Brady and Steph Curry. Vice posed as the cool friend who hated corporate media while quietly cashing corporate checks. WeWork called itself a community company, not a landlord. And this changed everything, because suddenly the product wasn't just content, or desks, or trading. It was belonging. What's interesting, though, is how well this worked. For a while, Quibi raised around $1.75 billion before most people had even downloaded the app. Vice hit a $5.7 billion valuation by selling the idea that it understood youth culture better than anyone. WeWork rode its $47 billion dream straight into SoftBank's pocket. FTX hit $32 billion and convinced normal people that crypto was safe because, hey, it bought a Super Bowl ad. Every day, this hype pulled in users, employees, and investors who didn't just like the products. They believed. Their dream was to be early to the inevitable future. How did a towel store, a crypto exchange, a co-working chain, a short-form app, and a punk media brand all convince people they were revolutions, not businesses? However, there's a dark side. When a brand sells inevitability, there's no graceful way to just be smaller. Quibi couldn't quietly pivot to YouTube-style free content after promising to reinvent Hollywood. WeWork couldn't say, "Actually, we're just a flexible office company," after telling the world it would elevate the world's consciousness. FTX couldn't become a boring brokerage once it positioned itself as the cool, fearless future of finance. This meant that any stumble looked like betrayal. A missed earnings target wasn't just a number, it was proof the story might be a lie. At that moment, it was hard to imagine these brands admitting limits without shattering the illusion they'd spent billions building. And the psychological impact was brutal. Employees didn't just lose jobs, they lost identities. Investors didn't just lose money, they lost the story they told themselves about being visionaries. If the brand was the insane history of the future, what did it mean about you when it all went to zero? Welcome to the dark side of hype marketing, when the story runs faster than the math. Because in the next sections, the question becomes simple. Can you spot the next future Quibi before the credits roll? So how do you actually spot the next Quibi before it burns $2 billion and 6 months of your attention span? Because hype is loud, but the red flags are usually whispering in the background. The first whisper is the mission statement that sounds like a new religion. Elevate global consciousness. Redefine humanity. Revolutionize community. Sounds huge, until you realize they're renting desks, moving money, or selling towels. Their dream was to save the world, but the product is a slightly nicer office, a shinier debit card, or a coupon in an app. At that moment, it was hard to imagine WeWork was just a landlord with free beer, yet the story said, "We're a movement." That gap between sacred language and ordinary service? Massive red flag. The second sign lives in the numbers they don't really talk about. Quibi raised around $1.75 billion before most people even knew how to spell it. FTX hit a $32 billion valuation with a "trust me bro" vibe and almost no boring, detailed questions from fans about actual revenue. This story gets crazy when the funding rounds keep doubling, the headlines keep getting louder, but real usage, profit, or even a path to profit stays fuzzy. If the pitch deck is crystal clear, but the basic "how does this make money?" answer is not, that's another flag. Then there's the product itself. Can people share it, remix it, meme it without asking for permission? Quibi literally blocked screenshots and TV casting at launch. During a lockdown, when everyone was at home, watching long videos on big screens, that meant 0 organic clips on social media, 0 fan edits, 0 "did you see this?" moments. What's interesting, though, is how many modern brands repeat this mistake, locking everything down and relying on paid ads instead of genuine word of mouth. If a product only exists in billboards and influencer spawns, and never in your group chats, be suspicious. Red flag 4 hides independence. Vice rode Facebook's traffic wave right into a $5.7 billion valuation, then watched the tide go out and filed for bankruptcy. Bed Bath & Beyond spent decades as a suburban ritual, but its late digital pivot left it exposed the second Amazon and big box competitors turned up the heat. When a brand is basically an accessory to one algorithm, one macro trend, or one cheap money era, a single policy change can erase everything. So here's the challenge. Think of a current brand that hits 2 or 3 of these: spiritual mission, runaway valuation, unshareable product, single point of failure. Mentally tag it as a maybe future 2020s relic. Because in the next part, the question becomes, what happens when those red flags finally meet a bad quarter and a brutal news cycle? So now that those red flags are in your head, here's the uncomfortable part. It's your turn. Out of these 5, which one actually touched your life? Quibi, Vice, WeWork, FTX, or Bed Bath & Beyond? Which logo lived on your phone, your browser, or your kitchen counter? Did you have the Quibi app downloaded and never opened it? Did you binge Vice documentaries while they were secretly burning investor cash? Did you swipe into a WeWork community space that was really just coffee, glass walls, and a vibe? Or maybe it was money on the line. FTX tokens sitting on the exchange because Tom Brady can't be wrong. Or a trunk full of those giant blue Bed Bath & Beyond coupons that suddenly meant nothing. Looking back, did any of those collapses feel obvious, or did they still seem untouchable right up until the moment the bankruptcy headline hit? Here's the challenge. Drop a comment naming the 2020s brand you're convinced is the next Quibi. Not just, this company is cringe, but use the framework from before. Does it have a spiritual mission that sounds like a TED Talk? A runaway valuation that only makes sense if the line goes up forever? An unshareable product nobody brags about? A single point of failure founder that every article treats like a prophet? Which company checks 2 or 3 of those boxes for you? Because this story gets crazy when the audience starts spotting the pattern before the investors do. And this is where it gets fun. Call your shots. In 2 years, will some inevitable unicorn be the punchline in a video just like this? Also, which of these 5 deserves the full deep dive treatment? A 2-hour breakdown of how FTX went from Super Bowl ads and naming arenas to an $8 billion hole? Or a mini-series on the insane history of the digital media bubble, from "We're not like those old newspapers" to "sold for pennies to a private equity fund"? Maybe a full episode on how Bed Bath & Beyond went from suburban ritual to liquidation meme. Say which one, and say what you still don't understand about it. And if you had skin in the game, don't keep that to yourself. Send this video to the friend who proudly pitched Quibi as the future of TV, or the coworker who camped at a WeWork hot desk, or the cousin who tried to get you to move everything to FTX. Compare war stories in the comments, because those little personal details are where the red flags become real. At that moment, it was hard to imagine these brands would vanish. In the next part, the question flips. How can users and creators stop falling for the same tricks? And this changed everything for how to read a brand story before it crashes. So what did all of this actually teach? 5 giant brands, billions of dollars, endless hype, and the same handful of mistakes repeating in different costumes. Quibi was the purest version. Their dream was to prove that if you stack $1.75 billion, Hollywood directors, and A-list actors on top of an app, success is automatic. However, locking quick bites to phones only in a year when everyone was stuck on couches binging long shows on TVs exposed the truth. Money and celebrities can amplify a product, but they cannot manufacture product market fit. If people don't need it, they just don't tap. Vice showed the flip side. For years, the brand screamed, "We hate corporate media," while quietly becoming a $5.7 billion corporate media empire. At that moment, it was hard to imagine the punk magazine begging lenders for cash. But anti-corporate cool still has to answer to corporate economics. When the ad market tightened and the growth story faded, the vibe couldn't cover the losses, and the insane history of edgy youth culture ended in a very traditional bankruptcy court. WeWork tried to escape gravity entirely. How did renting desks go from boring real estate to a $47 billion community company? This story gets crazy when you realize nothing magical happened to the math. Calling rent membership and offices community didn't change lease obligations, occupancy rates, or interest payments. Spiritual branding and soft-focus mission statements can delay hard questions, but eventually the spreadsheets win. This meant the moment the market stopped believing the story, the whole thing snapped back to reality. FTX was the same illusion, just on fast forward. It looked like the polished, regulated-sounding grown-up in a chaotic crypto casino, stadium naming rights, Super Bowl ads, Tom Brady. However, behind the branding, there were no basic safeguards, no transparency, and an $8 billion hole. What's interesting, though, is how many smart people assumed that because it looked like a bank, it behaved like one. In the 2020s, Trust Me Bro, with a compliance costume is still Trust Me Bro. And then there's Bed Bath & Beyond. No wild mission, no techno-mysticism. Just towels, toasters, and those endless blue coupons. But even beloved, boring brands can die if they ignore slow-moving, unstoppable shifts. Every day, more shopping moved to Amazon and e-commerce, and the big box aisles stayed basically the same. Eventually, the suburban ritual turned into a liquidation meme. So what ties all of this together? In the 2020s, the brands that last won't be the ones shouting the loudest mission statements. They'll be the ones whose stories match their spreadsheets, whose hype matches their habits, and whose values show up in boring details like cash flow, safety, and customer behavior. Welcome to the next part. How to actually read those signals before the next can't-miss brand quietly disappears from your home screen. So now, you're dangerous in the best possible way. You're not just scrolling past logos and headlines anymore. You've seen the insane history of brands that looked untouchable and then vanished faster than a Quibi subscription reminder. Because once you've watched Quibi burn through $1.75 billion for an app you never opened, or seen a $47 billion community company like WeWork end up in bankruptcy court, it's hard to ever look at a hype reel the same way again. And this changed everything about your role. You're not just a consumer, you're an analyst with a front row seat. So next time a startup tells you they're reinventing everything, pause. What's the actual product? Who actually pays? What's the boring version of this story? The one without the neon mission statements and slow-motion drone shots. At that moment, it's not about being cynical. It's about being curious before the collapse, instead of shocked after. Think about FTX, Super Bowl ads, an NBA arena. Tom Brady. Their dream was to make crypto feel inevitable. However, behind the scenes, there was an $8 billion hole and a Trust Me Bro brand built on vibes instead of verifiable numbers. How did a company go from buying naming rights to becoming a courtroom exhibit? Once you start asking those three questions, this story gets crazy a lot earlier. And this is where you come in. If you learned even one new way to read the gap between the pitch and the profit, hit like. So this kind of breakdown actually travels further than the press releases. Subscribe for more deep dives into the insane history of brands that went from revolution to relic. And tap the bell so you don't miss the next collapse autopsy when it's still unfolding in real time. Because what's interesting, though, is that this channel isn't just about nostalgia for failed companies. It's about building a community of people who see the pattern before it hits the front page. So drop your smartest, spiciest take in the comments. Which current brand feels like a future documentary episode waiting to happen? The next Vice or Bed Bath & Beyond in disguise. One comment is getting pinned, the sharpest call-out, the boldest prediction, or the most surgical breakdown of a company that looks shiny on the surface but wobbly underneath. Every day, more viewers are getting better at spotting the cracks. Eventually, the brands that survive will be the ones that can handle that level of scrutiny. In a decade where a company can go from Super Bowl ad to bankruptcy court in under 3 years, the only real power move is understanding the insane history before it repeats.